I'm Jackson Shearer. This is my individual component for CE 450 on stormwater control management. All right, so here's a quick overview of what I did for my individual component. I looked at our site, which was unique in the fact that it's got a wetland running right in the middle of it, and said, okay, we've got 20 acres total, about 10 acres on the north and the south side, with a lot of impervious area that we need to collect rainwater from. So I looked at a stormwater design manual, saw about 10 different options and said, okay, let's narrow those down to 4 and compare them. The main things I wanted to compare were the total nutrients treated along with the total amount of stormwater that was treated. After looking at those, I decided to look at a few other things such as cost and maintenance and things like that, and ultimately decided to pick one stormwater control measure that would work for both sides of the site. So the first stormwater control measure that I looked at was called an infiltration system. And an infiltration system works by essentially taking water through the ground and removing nutrients that way. The water will pull up at a low point at the site and will seep through the ground where some of the nutrients are removed, and it will go into an underwater chamber where more nutrients are removed as well. It works well for removing nutrients as it removes 84% of the total nitrogen and total phosphorus. And in terms of treating the total amount of runoff, when sized at 100%, it'll treat 84% of the total runoff. So the second stormwater control measure that I looked at was a bioretention cell. And a bioretention cell is pretty similar to the infiltration system, except for the difference is instead of the water being treated underground, it's treated by the plants that are sitting in the bioretention cell. It works well. It treats a lot of runoff, however, it doesn't take out that many nutrients. The total amount of phosphorus removed is only 45%, and nitrogen is about 40%, which, looking at all 4 of the ones that I compared, these were the lowest. But like I said, it treats about 94% of total runoff, which is the best that we saw. But overall, for it to be sized at 100%, it needs to be massive for a site that's as big as ours. All right, so the third stormwater control measure that we looked at was called a sand filter. And a sand filter works by bringing all the water in at a low point, sending it through the surface grate, and then down through the sand filter where all the nutrients are taken out. In terms of nutrient removal, we didn't have percentages like we did the other two. We did have a milligram per liter amount. For phosphorus, it was about 0.12 milligrams per liter. And for nitrogen, it was about 1.33 milligrams per liter. In terms of total runoff, we treated about 91%, which was not as good as the bioretention cell, but still better than the first one, the infiltration system. So the fourth and final stormwater control measure that we looked at was called a wet pond. And a wet pond works a lot different than the other 3 measures that we looked at. It takes in water like the rest of them, but instead of turning it into the ground or putting it into a sand filter, there's already water that's concentrated within the wet pond. This runoff will come onto the top, the nutrients will settle out, and eventually the water will get drained out and returned back to the stream or groundwater table or whatever it is. These work well in terms of removing nutrients. It's about the same as the previous one. It takes out about 0.15 milligrams per liter of phosphorus and 1.22 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. In terms of total runoff, it was a little bit lower at 84%, which was the same as the infiltration system, but it still works well. And the best things about these is that they're easy to build and they're easy to maintain. All right, so after looking at all 4 of the stormwater control measures that were compared, we decided that for our site, the best option was to go with a stormwater wet pond, such as this one like here. Our site was divided into 2 separate areas, kind of that north and that south area split by the wetlands and the stream. So we needed to decide something that was going to work for both sides while trying to keep costs low. And ultimately we came to the decision that 2 of these essentially were going to be what we wanted to do. While a bioretention cell and an infiltration system, those could have worked. It would have been a lot more expensive to maintain, and they would have had to be really large compared to something like this. When you take a 20-acre site, even divide it into 2, say it's a 10-acre site, and you split it up for a bioretention cell or an infiltration system, and you size it to 100%, those smaller type of things are going to be end up being huge because they don't take in a ton of water. Where something like this it's got a lot of surface area, so it treats a bunch of water. It's not that deep, so it's not that expensive to build in the first place, and also you can just let it sit here. It's not something that you need to maintain and come in and dig out and fill and do a bunch of work on. It's just something that's going to be there, and it's just going to work for a while. This neighborhood here has over 200 houses, and you know, a stormwater wet pond like this works great. We're at the lowest point here. It takes in all the water from the surrounding impervious areas. It filters out. It'll settle. All the nutrients will settle. It'll filter out through that thing, and then it exits under this kind of bank that I'm standing on and out to a stream that's just over that way. So it's the same thing for our site. It's going to work great. It fits in great where we've got all the townhomes, and ultimately it was just the most cost efficient and just common sense decision that we could come to. A stormwater wet pond, it treats enough water, even though it doesn't treat as much nutrients as the other ones. It still works great, and it was just ultimately the control measure that we wanted to go with. So like I said, at the stormwater wet pond, building these types of wet ponds, they're cheap and they're feasible. Building a bioretention cell or a sand filter is not something that was going to work for this site, so we decided to go just with the traditional stormwater wet pond. We added one on the north and one on the south. The one on the north here, the smaller one, had a recommended volume of 10,000 cubic feet, and we decided to go a little bit bigger and give it 13,000 cubic feet. The second one on the lower part of the site was given a recommended volume of 15,000 cubic feet. We decided to give it 25,000 cubic feet. Reason why we could go so big on these is, like I said, it's cheap and they're easy to build, and they're treating more nutrients when they're sized at over 100%. So in the end, we decided to go with 2 stormwater basins, one on the north, one on the south side. It was easy, it was feasible, and it made a lot more sense than any of the other stormwater control measures that I looked at. I'm Jackson, and thanks for watching my presentation.